Try to remember to turn off all the electronics.
All right. We are live, RTD Live Talk. I'm excited to have Kevin Massengill, CEO of Mary Gleam Holdings, here to share with us his thoughts on the economy and a variety of other topics, as well as his partnership with IBM and this Watson Predictive Analytics, which is going to be very exciting to give us like a heads up into the economy and what's happening in the future. So, Kevin Massengill, welcome to RTD Live Talk.
Well, thank you, Mike. It's a real pleasure to be back with you.
Well, our last chat, as I mentioned prior to us going live, was well received. I think out of all my prior guests, you probably did the best in regards to breaking it down and making it real simple for your average person who has no financial or no monetary awareness whatsoever to understand it. And so there's constant comments on how well you related to the audience. So I'm looking forward to hopefully you keeping it simple for us today and helping us really understand where we're at. We got the government shutdown. We have everything happening out east, right. You name it. And so those are all things that are very important to us, as well as just things we need to know about. So we got a few people chiming in. So as always, I want to welcome those that are viewing. And as always, encourage you to join the conversation by calling toll free at the number above my head to ask any questions you have on the economy or the markets to Kevin Massengill. So without further ado, let's dive into it. And I'm curious as to your thought on this whole government shutdown and how this all will pan out in the days ahead. And yeah, give me your thoughts on what's happening in DC.
Well, so I come from a school of libertarianism that's somewhere between anarcho-capitalism and minarchism. And so while most people panic at the idea of a government shutdown, I get kind of a panic attack at the idea that they're ever going to come back to work at some point. So it's hard for me to take this kind of theater seriously. The government is running close to $5 to $6 trillion deficit a year and lying through their teeth about that. If you made them account for their spending the way they make every corporation in America account for spending, just normal GAAP processes, right? Make them account for the future value of their pension obligations, et cetera. You know, they're going in the hole something like $5 or $6 trillion a year. And it's completely unsustainable. We're already broke. And the only reason the house of cards can continue is the rest of the world still takes those dollars. So what's curious to me about that is that's in a sense a confidence game, right? In every sense of that word. It relies on the good faith and confidence of everybody else that America is good for its debts. And every time they play these kind of games, they call that into question, right? They highlight the fact that at some point, maybe not right away, but at some point there'll come a time where America's checks just bounce. And so every time these political parties play this game, and this is not a partisan thing. Republicans did the same thing a couple of years ago under Ted Cruz's leadership. Now they're doing it under Schumer's leadership. But every time they do that, they just kick the props out from underneath the U.S. dollar as a world reserve currency, one more time. And eventually at some point, we're going to wake up to a massive dollar crisis like you and I discussed last time we talked. And people will wonder why. Well, you can't act like this forever.
I agree. And it's amazing how they're arguing over spending and what they can budget to do this and do that. And they're pointing left and pointing right. And it's so much conflict. And it's a bad reflection on our country. The fact that our political figures, those that have been chosen to lead our nation, can't agree on some of what would seem as basic things these days. But yet it's a bad reflection, in my opinion, on our country. And it doesn't do us any justice in the fact that a lot of nations are already questioning and trying to diversify away from the dollar and our debt and things like that. So, do you think this arguing and bickering amongst our own politicians will continue on? And how would it play out in the months ahead as far as government saying, okay, they are completely, off their rocks. Let's try to really begin ramping this thing up getting away from them and diversifying even more.
Let's take instead of giving you a short-term view, let me give you a long-term view. So historically speaking, there's only three types of government: rule by the one, rule by the few, rule by the many. And there's a good form and a bad form of that. Good and bad defined as whether they rule for the good of all versus whether they rule for the good of themselves, right? So that's the difference between a monarch and a tyrant, an aristocracy and an oligarchy, or a constitutional republic versus a democracy. Now, these arguments are ancient. I'm quoting Aristotle now. So, I mean, these are not old ideas. And the reason a democracy is considered the worst form of government is because it always leads to anarchy and mob rule. It devolves into factionalism, as the founding fathers described. And so the way you protect against that, the first thing you do, you protect against the normal trend, which is to go into democracy, which is easily whipsawed by demagogues. And then it emerges full-blown into a tyranny as soon as the dictator can seize the weapons from the people. To frustrate that historical trend, Aristotle thought, okay, then you should diffuse power as much as possible, arm the population, right? Hence a core idea of a constitutional republic, so that the tyrant can't emerge. And then you stratify government at as many levels as possible, right? Local, state, and federal, to try to frustrate that factionalism, right? And you set up institutions like the Senate, where a little tiny state like Rhode Island has the same voice and vote as a massive state like Texas or California, right? These are all mechanisms designed to protect against factionalism. About 100 years ago, the country consolidated, the leadership in Washington consolidated the power they'd won in Lincoln's War, and they broke the republic. They stripped away three core elements of what made us a republic. The first was the franchise of the state leadership to appoint their own senators. That's a core power for the states. Imagine if you and I were governors and we didn't like what our senators did in Washington. We recalled them. They were like ambassadors, exactly like ambassadors. Yeah. And if you were a governor of a state and that guy wasn't doing what you told him to do, or gal wasn't doing what you told her to do, you just called him on the phone and said, come home, you're done, you're fired. And you'd appoint another one. That's enormous power at the state level. The second thing they did was they instituted an unconstitutional income tax. Now, they did whatever they thought they needed to do to pretend that they amended the Constitution. But the point is, what they were doing was literally unconstitutional, against the Constitution, by trying to appoint a tax on labor and its income. And then the third thing they did was they recreated the third U.S. central bank, right? The first one died right after the War of Independence. The second one, I believe, Andrew Jackson killed. Mm-hmm. And then the third one, of course, they reformed. They just gave it a fancy new name, but it's no more the Federal Reserve than Federal Express as part of the American government, right? I mean, they just use words to be clever. So those three things they did to break the power of the states, consolidate power in Washington. And at that point, we became a democracy. And that's why today you hear, if you ask the average person on the street to explain to you in 30 seconds or less the difference between the two, they'll go into vapor lock. Well, there can't be a difference because we're both, right? We're a republic. We pledge allegiance to the republic, but we're a democracy, right? Every vote should count.
Right.
They've not been trained because they went, most of them grew up in government schools. The government's got a vested interest in not explaining the difference. And a democracy always ends the same way. And we're on that path. In factionalism, fighting for resources in this ever-increasing tension. So the short answer is, no, it's not going to get better. It's only going to get worse. Right. At no point are the people in Washington going to sit up and go, this is just bad behavior, right? We shouldn't be acting like this. The reason that's not going to happen is because they'd all be voted out of office if they did. Because the American people want this competition. They are all in their factions competing for goods and services and free stuff. And they're going to vote people in office that go throw sharp elbows and get them their stuff. And so at no point are you going to have it, in my opinion, you're going to have a generation of Americans sit up and go, this is just inappropriate. we can't live at other people's expense. We can't just keep taking and demanding, the transfer payments from people that have done better than we have economically. That's just inappropriate, right? You can't demand the top 1% earners in the country pay 40% of the taxes, right?
Yeah.
But at no point is that going to happen. So the long-term end of this is ever increasing factionalism, ever increasing sharp rhetoric, less and less ability to interact, less and less ability to make long-term decisions for the good of the country. Because in a democracy, it's a 24-month cycle. There's nobody that thinks beyond 24 months. What's the next election? And what do I do to position myself or my party to win? That's all they care about. Well, you can't run a corporation thinking in short term. You can't run a company like that, a country like that either.
Do you think, or do you foresee it, the fact that there's so much confusion and so much division in our political realm now? Do you see a day where there is a more of a two-party or beyond a two-party system that's presented to the people, to where they realize that this left, right, Republican, Democrat is all an illusion of a false choice anyway?
It is a false choice. So good question. I'm a really horrible handicapper of the American body politic. I've been amazed at their selections for decades. So, from a libertarian standpoint, the way to think about this is think of a diamond structure. Think of a diamond pattern where you have kind of libertarians at the top, of course, in their diagram, where they believe the state ought to have no role whatsoever other than to protect your property and your person from encroachment by others. Full stop, right? And other than that, you should be able to do or make any decision you want, as long as you're not harming anybody else. Nobody else has a right to tell you what to do. Kind of a core principle. The non-aggression principle, it's described in some circles. At the very bottom of the diamond, you have the statist. This is the person who thinks the government should control everything, right? People are like Labradors and they have to be protected from themselves, right? And that we're the adults, we're the priest kings in the Platonic sense, and we've got to direct these people. Otherwise, they make bad decisions, and they're like unruly children, and we must watch over them. That's the statist mentality. And then you get the left and right. And what's interesting about this is each of them are about half right and half wrong. And so on the right, you've got generally a better attitude about economic freedom, that there ought to be a separation between state and business, but yet on some social issues, they declare the right to make declarative statements of morality and other things that they would use the state to impose what they think. Then on the left, you have the inverse, the mirror image, right? Where it's a libertine, laissez-faire guy wants to marry his Labrador. Woohoo, that's great. You should demand the recognition of that marriage. But so they have maximum social freedom to their mind. But economically, cash for clunkers. We should have minimum wage laws. We should, the state should be involved in economic business activities and business outcomes, right? So both of them are half right, and half wrong. And to my mind, the closer you get to the top of that pyramid, the idea where, how about we just all leave each other alone? Can we try that for a while?
That would be helpful. Oh, man. Good way of explaining that. I want to move a little further into, because you hinted at earlier, the tax reform, and the idea that they're cutting corporate tax, and with the idea of generating more income driven back into our country. So I want to get your thoughts on that, because we need more revenue from somewhere, being that, we're going to run a major deficit with this infrastructure stuff in the wall and the Dreamers Act, and all these expenditures we're taking on. Do you think this tax reform will actually help, or will it be a short-term jolt in our economy that's going to, die off eventually?
So certainly, I think it'll be a short-term help. It's no long-term fix, as you point out. It doesn't change the spending dynamic, and the country spends too much, and there's no amount of capital, there's no amount of wealth that can be drained from the American people that can offset the amount of money the government's spending, period. It wouldn't. You could take everything the entire country produces, you would make a dent in the debt that's owed. So every time somebody talks about well, this is going to impact our income and we have a deficit. It's a mock argument. It's not true. There's nothing you could take every bit of income the country generates, every dollar, every dime, every gold tooth yanked out of the head of every American citizen. You're not going to make a dent in this lunatic spending spree. And there's no way to arrest that. You're a democracy now, right? And democracies do what democracies do, and they buy votes with transfer payments. And we've made promises starting in the 30s and 40s. We're never going to pay. So the right way to think about it. So temporarily, will a tax, any improvement in an oppressive tax regime help? Sure, but take a historical perspective, right? So think back when Israel's a theocracy and they're ruled by God in that case in the person of the prophet Samuel, and they decide they don't like that. They want to be like other countries, right? They want a king, and they started agitating for a king. And Samuel is pretty annoyed. And he says something about it to God. And God says, they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me. So give them their king. Yeah. And Samuel makes this comment to the Israeli people, which I think is just fantastic. He says, do you understand what you're doing? Do you understand the power you're going to give to this one person? And now here, think of this. This is the biblical definition, at least Samuel's definition of tyranny, right? And think about this in the context of what we live under in the West. He says, if you do this, this king is going to take your sons for war. He's going to take your daughters into his harem, and he's going to take 10% of your produce. 10% was the shocking number that Samuel thought would snap these people out of their nonsense, right? And we're given what? 40, 50, 60% of ours. It's just amazing situation. To my mind.
And the thing about that, which really hits home, is the fact that they were so in dire need of being like those nations that surrounded them that they didn't realize they were putting themselves into captivity under the one person. So,
that's exactly right. So for the people listening, so here's the right way to think about this. Will there be a short-term boom because of the tax? Oh, sure, of course. It raises confidence, right? It helps people think that they see a better stable future, and so they can spend money and invest money. And so anything you do that lowers the burden on business helps free up capital for research and development, expansion, new job creation, etc. And that's true enough on its face. The problem is it's not sufficient because you're still spending way more money than you take in or can ever take in. And so the theory that you can somehow grow the economy fast enough to overtake this debt, and therefore, in a combination of this 2% per year destruction of the value of the currency, somehow in a combination of that in 20 or 30 years, you can make this all better. Historically, it's never worked, right? So what your listeners should expect instead is to wake up one day and find out that the dollar's been destroyed by its own government. They've decided they're just going to wipe it out unilaterally, which is how they wipe out the debt that they owe, right? And so this is what all governments always do. They hyperinflate their currency to destroy the currency, but it destroys the debt, right? And so while it's what they're going to do, it's what they always do, it comes at the cost. It destroys the pensioners, it destroys the savers, it destroys the moral foundation of a society. And so your investors just need to be aware that that's inevitable. It's encroaching. It's happening every day. Our actual inflation rate's running closer to 10% per year, not 2% or whatever they're pretending it is.
Right.
And so they need to get their assets, such as they can, into precious metals, into income producing real estate. Go buy a duplex, go buy a fourplex, get your assets into things that can't be hyperinflated away. And just kind of hunker down and get ready for what's coming. And actually, you could, sounds harsh, but you can actually benefit from this because you know what they're going to do. You can't stop them, and it's a horrific thing they're going to do and a horrific outcome for your countrymen, but you can't stop them. So the best thing you can do is kind of arrange your affairs so at least you don't get crushed in it, and you may even come out ahead.
So Kevin, I think we have a caller. Caller, what's your name and where you calling from? Hold on 1 second. I'm sorry,
Kevin.
What's your name, Kevin?
Okay, I'm going to have a caller. What's your name and where you calling from?
Can you do me a favor? Can you cut your phone? Can you mute your computer so we can hear you and not?
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's Kubera Williams.
All right. So your name is. I'm sorry. One more time. Where you calling from? What's your name again?
Yeah, that's Kubera Williams, California.
Kubera Williams from California. Okay, nice to meet you, my friend. Thanks for calling in. What's your thoughts? What's your question?
My question is this recent thing with Hawaii, the false thing with the missiles or something. Some people say, gee, somebody hit the wrong button or something, and other people say, well, gee, it was really real, but there was a missile that took it out. I wanted to know what your thoughts were about that.
Fair enough. Kevin, are you familiar with that?
Sure. Yeah.
Your thoughts?
So it's theoretically possible, but Occam's razor would tell us it was simply a mistake, right? Because for that to have been an actual incoming attack and then intercepted by the forces in Pacific Command, you'd have more governments than just ours would have seen the missile track, right? That'd be really hard to hide. Such an attack on Hawaii would almost certainly have to have gone up and over Japan. Japan's forces would have seen that missile, right? It'd have been really hard to hide such a thing. And I don't understand why anybody would, right? It would help President Trump make his case that these are reckless and dangerous and they have to be dealt with. So publicizing it would actually be the much more likely thing to have happen. In fact, President Trump's opponents will assume that if something happens, that it probably wasn't true, and he's probably making it up, right? So it's actually the opposite's probably much more likely, that you'll have an attack and people will be like, yeah, that wasn't real. You're just saying that. But I understand the question. I just think Occam's razor, the simplest answer probably will suffice, is that somebody just made a mistake, hit the wrong button. Something similar happened days later in Tokyo, right? Japan had the exact same phenomena. Somebody accidentally triggered their emergency broadcast system. And I think it's just nothing more than people who are responsible for these things haven't had to think about them for a really long time, and they're kind of dusting it off and looking at it and kind of, and just made a mistake. I think that's all it was.
Now watch this, and typically in priors, there's been, things that have been wars and things that have been started from mistakes such as that. So
sure,
there was an intended, desire to actually start something, and that's what that was all about, or if that was the case.
Again, in the modern age, it's tough to fake that kind of thing, right? So I mean, there's just so many other countries that will have missile track data. It'd be almost impossible for you to pretend there was a missile strike when there wasn't. I mean, there'd be just so many other countries you could say, we don't see any of that, right? So again, I understand the impulse, but having been around government people and senior State Department people and whatnot all my life, I got to tell you, I don't want to just make a too broad a brush, but they're not that impressive. They're just normal folks. Let me say it that way. And so while there's this tendency to want to believe that these are really thoughtful adults making these decisions, yeah, no, they're really not. They're they're just like you. They're just like your friends. They're subject to the same foibles and human desires and fears of everybody else. They're not super smart. They're just normal folks. Trying to do the best they can. But whenever you hear a theory that requires, real foresight and skullduggery and planning, yeah, probably not.
That's fair enough. So hopefully, I'm glad it was nothing major. Nothing came from that right away, but we'll see. So let's move a little bit to the global economy. I want to get your thoughts on this year. And as we ended last year, there was a ramp up to get the Chinese yuan futures with dealing with oil out into the market. And so here we are this year, 2018. I believe January 18th was the day it was supposed to be unleashed or revealed, but I haven't heard much in the news about it. So give me your thoughts on how the implementation of a Chinese yuan, oil, gold, all those words together might really, ramp up this year and play into the demise of the current system with the petrodollar.
That's a great question. So Two thoughts come to mind. First of all, we believe that China is facing a massive currency devaluation. There was a model developed a couple of years ago that's called the trilemma. And you can think of this when I was a young staff officer, people would, your boss would come up and hand you a nasty pile of work to do, right? Mm-hmm. And you'd laugh and you go, okay, boss, you know the rule, right? You can have it fast, you can have it right, or you can have it pretty. Pick two, right? Because if it's fast and right, it's not going to be pretty, right? If it's fast and pretty, it's not going to be right, right? And that's the joke. That's the staff officer's trilemma. Well, there's something similar in central bank policy, right? And basically, you can't have all three at the same time. You can't have, an open market account. You can't have an independent policy, right? Because what happens is if you want to have an independent policy and not peg your interest rates, then you're going to have capital outflows that are going to go to wherever the higher interest rates are in the world. If you clamp down on that, on the currency outflows, and you don't have an open currency accounts, then people are going to be loath to invest money in your economy because they're going to be concerned that they can't get it out, right? Remember when India did that for years? It just killed their foreign direct investment because people couldn't repatriate their winnings, their earnings. Why would you put money somewhere? And it just gutted their economy. So the bottom line is China has tried to manage this for the last year or so. In 2015, they had a small devaluation, about 10%. I mean, not that small, but it really shook up foreign markets. It did it again in 2016. But they've been hemorrhaging their treasuries. They went from about $4 trillion in treasuries all the way down to $3 fairly quickly, and then they arrested that withdrawal. We think they did that in the summer of last year because they wanted to get ready for the October party conference that they went through just this last summer in October. But earlier than that, they were arresting this and trying to just kind of hold it all in place till Xi could finish consolidating political power. We project still that once they were through that period, they were going to have to deal with this again because you just can't keep the trilemma going indefinitely. Something's going to give, something's going to break. And so what we think is going to happen is they're going to do a sharp devaluation of the Chinese yuan, probably at least 20%. It needs to be something dramatic that everybody thinks, okay, this, they're done. That was it. And now they're going to defend that peg. Because otherwise, if you just do it incrementally, people, they have no sense of where the bottom is, right? And so you just prolong the problem. But if you do a really sharp, violent devaluation, you position yourself for better exports. You do all kinds of things, right? You correct the imbalances that are kind of built up in the economic system. America's been doing this to our currency since President Obama's policy, I think, in 2012, I want to say. He announced a big global export policy, maybe 2010. That we were gonna double our exports and buy so much. Well, that's an announcement of a currency war. That's a devaluation of the U.S. dollar policy. Well, China pegged to that for quite a while, which we then yelled about and called them currency manipulators, which is just hysterical, right? All they were doing is peg to the dollar, but you're not letting us manipulate currency. You're just tracking along with us. Damn it, that's not fair.
Yeah.
So we think probably before the second quarter of this year, 2018, China is going to announce a sharp devaluation, probably 20%, and markets are going to fall out of bed all over the world. It will be a sharp market correction because of it. But we think it's inevitable. We don't think they have a choice to protect their treasury, to protect the loss, the capital flight from the country. They're going to have to do that. We don't think they have a choice.
All right. So let me ask you a question. Last time we spoke, you mentioned how events can usually come from anywhere around the world. And you mentioned several countries of which they can just trickle right into our economy. And so our government here, or not our government, our central bank here, I've read a lot of articles in the mainstream media talking about how they're trying to come up with ways on how to handle the next recession when it comes. And so could this devaluation in China, can the ripple effect come this way when it hits our stock market and bond market?
Absolutely will. Oh, it absolutely will.
What's that going to look
like?
like?
They did the small devaluation in 2015, smaller, 10% in 2015, and again in 2016. Markets just fell out of bed. They dropped huge. Now they rebounded quickly because so far everybody's still got this buy the dip mentality. The Fed's got your back. They're going to keep hyperinflating the currency, so they're going to keep juicing stock markets. So one of my concerns about the Trump administration is that they don't understand economics any better than the Obama administration did. Mm-hmm. Now, they may understand it, but for political reasons, they can't fix it, which is the same outcome, as far as I'm concerned. They've got a $4 trillion balance sheet at the Fed. They're doing a monetary experiment globally now, the world over, that nobody's ever seen, right? Can you kite fake money all around the world and grow economies that way? Does that really work? Nobody knows. And we're about to find out, which is why we've got 5,000-year lows in bond markets, right? We've got negative interest rates, first time it's ever been seen on the planet, right? Give me money and I'll guarantee to hold it for you for 100 years and give you back less than you gave me. Oh, what a deal. Let me sign up for that. I mean, it's insanity. But if the Trump administration understood the fragility of all this, they'd have come to power saying, we have a $4 trillion balance sheet at the Fed, right? We're going down we're going upside down $4 or $5 trillion a year. We got $20 trillion in debt, $200 trillion in unfunded liabilities. This is a mess. And they should have hammered on that and hammered on it, but they didn't. What they did was they saw the frothy stock market bubble up and they decided to jump on that and say, woohoo, see, we caused that. Now, in some sense, they did by the deregulation, by the pro-business environment, by the promise of future tax improvements. That did play a part, no doubt. But a frothy stock market is not a symptom of a healthy economy. Can be, but only if it's tied to corporate earnings, only if it's tied to real business advantages, right? If it's the result of just counterfeit money printing, I mean, there's a reason why the Zimbabwean stock market was the leading stock market in the world for years. And nothing to do with the underlying strength of the economy. It had to do with how many fake money you were printing. In the US, exactly the same. And the fact that the Trump administration started tweeting, wahoo, see how good we're doing, tells me they don't understand the fragility of the system. Because now when it blows up, and it will, they're going to own that. They're going to wear it. And for the next 20 years, I'm going to have to listen to pinhead socialists talk about your deregulation caused this. Oh my God. But anyway.
Kevin, we have a caller. What's your name and where you calling from?
My name is Wilmer. I'm calling from New Jersey.
Wilmer from New Jersey. What's your question for Kevin?
With civil asset forfeiture, do you think it's a good idea for bullion owners to keep their bullion in the United States?
So great question. I think civil asset forfeiture is one of the great American problems. It is an enormous problem. It is a massive violation of the Massengill's iron law of economics. It's like the law of gravity. You step off a building at 7 stories tall and above, you're about to learn a major life lesson.
Right.
Iron law of economics, just like the law of gravity. I called it the Massengill iron law of economics because I'm about to trademark it because nobody in this generation's ever heard it. Yeah. It's actually a really old idea. It's thou shalt not steal. But it's so rare for this generation. I'm pretty sure I can brand it and nobody will notice. So when governments do that, when governments act like that, they're just thieves under color of law. The government, the whole overall economy is going to be heading in the wrong direction, right? It may take a little while, but it's heading in the wrong direction. Now, so there are two parts to your question. Do I think that the government's going to re-seize gold and silver bullion the way the federal government did in 1933? Probably not, only because in 1933, they were going to devalue the dollar, which they did, and they did that by seizing the gold and then repricing against gold. And they wanted to capture the benefit of that in themselves. They didn't want to share that with the American people. So they stole the gold at They made you give it to them at the current market price, knowing They were going to devalue your dollars and just declare gold now to be $33 an ounce instead of 22, a 70% devaluation of the US dollar. And they were going to do that at your expense. But so few people own gold today. I just don't think it's worth the political problems. There's just tiny fraction of people that actually own gold. So I don't think they will. That said, because of the civil asset forfeiture and because they did at one time, I see no value whatsoever in holding your precious metal bullions in the United States. I just don't. There's too many options abroad. So I would look at goldmoney.com, bullionvault.com. Egon von Greyetz runs something in Switzerland called Matterhorn Asset Management, I think it's called. But any of those, all of those are very well regarded. They're all heavily, properly audited. They're all properly managed. I would absolutely do that. At home, I would keep a monster box of silver. This is the 500 1-ounce silver coins from the treasury. It'll come to you in size of a shoebox and wickedly heavy. You can just throw it in your closet and forget about it. The reason for that is in extremis, in a real meltdown of any sort. Those single 1-ounce silver coins will let you buy groceries, will let you buy gas, right? People, think about Puerto Rico. That didn't require a nuclear accident. That was just an act of God, a wicked storm. And they've still got massive outages of electricity, which means you can't buy or sell. There's no commerce. There's no debit cards or credit cards functioning, right? So think what a monster box of silver would do for you and your family if you were stuck in that situation. So I would keep something like that on hand, and that's just to tide you over for a couple of weeks until whatever that impediment to trade and commerce is resolved. I'm not thinking Mad Max, but people in Puerto Rico would benefit from having this.
Right.
And then the rest I would keep outside the country. It's like opening a brokerage account. It's no different. And every time you want to transfer funds, you just tell your bank, wire, another chunk of change to this account, and it'll pop up on your screen and you tell it buy gold and silver. I would recommend storage in Switzerland or Singapore or both. I wouldn't store it in London, and I wouldn't store it in U.S. vaults.
All right. Fair enough. I'll call you. Have one more question for Kevin. What is that question?
All right. After, the collapse and all this, how many ounces do you think it would take to get an average priced house, or however it's priced in the future? Gold or silver?
So that's a really interesting question. I think the way I'd answer that is that, as a general rule, gold holds its value relative to society because we can only increase our total holdings of gold, because of the way mining works, by about 1.5%, maybe 2% per year, which tracks almost perfectly with human productivity. And what that means is, over a very long period of time, 1-ounce gold coin has the same purchasing power it always had, right? So in the Roman Empire, a single-ounce gold coin would outfit me with a beautiful handmade pair of sandals, a beautiful cloak, a beautiful, top coat, and top cloak. It would outfit, a gentleman quite nicely. And today, a 1-ounce gold coin will buy me a really nice pair of shoes, a great suit, right? So gold tends to hold its value. So what I would tell you, and since housing prices are perfectly correlated to incomes, housing's a commodity, and it can't go much beyond what people can afford, unless you have government interference and manipulated mortgage markets and free money and that sort of thing. And then you'll get anomalies like we have right now. But if you went back and you looked at 1995 trend lines and you just kind of plotted out where housing should be, and then divided that by the number of ounces it would take to buy today, I would say that's pretty much the same number it'll be going forward. There'll be some complexity. There'll be a period of time where gold is more dear than houses. So on balance, I would just hold on to them. If you think about what happened in the Weimar Republic, when you had the complete collapse of the Rentenmark and the Reichsmark, and there was a period of time where you could buy an entire city block for a single-ounce gold coin. Those things can happen, but But I wouldn't try to game the system. And there'll be people that I've heard people say, well, let's go just borrow up money since government's going to destroy the currency and destroy debt anyway. Why don't we just go borrow a bunch of money and we'll have our debt wiped out when the dollar's wiped out? What typically happens and what you can expect to have happen, because governments and banks are the twin sides of the same evil coin. They're not going to lose money. Right. What they'll do is they'll just say, you know what? You owed us X amount of dollars before the dollar collapsed. In gold, that's X, and we're repricing the contract into gold. You didn't gain anything, right? They're not going to lose. So I wouldn't go greatly into debt thinking somehow the dollar's collapse is going to work in your favor. But if you hold a 30-year assets in gold and silver, try to get a 30-year assets into income-producing real estate, whether that's agriculture or multifamily, something like that, and maybe a third in cash, split between the dollar and the Swiss franc or some other strong currency, you're probably in as good a position as you can be for either. We're kind of on a knife edge. We have these tectonic forces in play, and nobody knows if it's going to be massive devaluation, massive hyperinflation. I tend to believe it'll be massive deflation as a sharp shock, and then the government will overreact and do hyperinflation. So that's actually what I think is going to happen. So if you can position yourself in, kind of one third like that, you're in a really good shape no matter what happens.
All right, fair enough. Kevin, we have another caller. Caller, what's your name and where you calling from?
Hi, sir. My name is Eddie. I'm from Virginia. I really do appreciate the show, so I'm going to ask my question and something else can get in. Different countries around the world, France, Germany, I believe I was discussing banning cryptocurrency. They seem to be using the excuse that it may be a venue for illegal activity, like drugs and such. Do you think that's really, really close to the Nixon argument whenever they took us off the gold standard? And does it hold any water? And I'll hang up. Thank you for the show, gentlemen.
Thank you for calling.
Thanks, Eddie. Great question. So, well, first of all, let me break the link to Nixon. So what he was doing now, he used the same excuse. He used the public excuse that we got to protect the dollar from foreign currency manipulators. So to that extent, yeah, he created a straw man argument for why he was doing what he was doing. But what he was really doing was defaulting on the Bretton Woods Agreement. He was simply defaulting. And at the end of World War II, we had something like 22,000 tons of gold. Because as you'll recall, we set out the war for a long period of time, both World War I and World War II. We were on the sidelines. And in point of fact, we were selling goods and services to both sides for quite a while, and making bank and making them pay us in gold, by the way. Pretty clever. And so by the end of World War II, we were relatively unscathed economically, and we're sitting on 22,000 tons of gold. So we got to make all the rules. And so we set up Bretton Woods. And basically, you tied all the world's currencies to the dollar, and then the dollar was pegged to gold. So the world was on a de facto gold standard at the central bank level. But because we started printing money, we started hyper spending beyond our economic ability, starting in probably the mid-'60s, I guess. By the end of the 60s, we had lost so much gold because governments recognized what we were doing. They're like, "Oh, you're just jamming the currency, right?" They started sending their paper dollars in to give us our gold back, right? And all of a sudden, we're just hemorrhaging gold because of it. Now, you have two choices. You have a political or an economic decision. The economic decision is live within your means, right? Stop hyperinflating your currency. Stop buying your reelection with promises of increased welfare and military spending, right? Stop just being an idiot. But, if you do that, you're not going to get reelected. So welcome to democracy. So then you have to do the political thing, which is just Secretary Connolly said, okay, yeah, it's our currency, but it's your problem. and Nixon just says, yeah, we're closing the gold window. What a lovely euphemism for a default, right?
It was supposed to be temporarily.
Of course, yeah, we're temporarily.
Years now, so technically
like daylight savings time, right? The temporary fix in World War I to save whale oil. we're still monkeying around, changing our clocks. So that's the first part. Yes, it's a straw man argument, like Nixon's straw man argument, but he was simply doing it not because there was anything to do with foreign bad actors, but because America was violating the international terms of agreement where you trust us, we'll peg our dollar to gold, and all the world's currencies can be on that standard. Well, that only works, as long as we're honest. As soon as we start hyperinflating our currency for a fake advantage, then we blew the system up. And that's what that was when we closed the gold window. Now, to your question about cryptocurrencies, are bad people using cryptos? Sure, of course. Are bad people using cash? You bet. Mm-hmm. Are bad people laundering billions of dollars through HSBC and every bank on the planet? You bet. Right. Absolutely. So the idea that the government needs to do or act in any way because of that is just silly propaganda. I mean, it's just patent nonsense. What the government's really doing whenever they announce that is that they are killing a competitor. That's all, right? They're gonna take crypto out behind the building and shoot it in the head, and they're gonna do it because they can't control, right? Think about government's source of power in income and money. It's about seeing financial transactions, sitting astride that, and taking their cut. I mean, that's how they live. It's their oxygen, right? And cryptocurrency promises to just starve them to death. Yeah. Here's an example. When fax machines first came out, you will not believe this is true, but it absolutely is. When fax machines first came out, the arrogant, idiotic U.S. government announces through the Postal Service that that's a first-class letter, and you can't send that to someone else's fax. You have to fax it to the U.S. Post Office and pay first-class postage, and they'll deliver it.
I know that.
And of course, everybody's like, yeah, right, screw you. They're faxing to each other. And the government, get away, right? And here's the point. If the government had a legitimate, cost-effective way to track your faxes, right? I can tell you right now, everybody be faxing to the post office, paying first-class postage, and there'd be an argument made that this was your moral duty and you're just a bad person if you don't. And in point of fact, there's nothing Malaman said about this at all. It's just simply what the government can enforce, right? And so cryptocurrency will very quickly blow up the idea that government should get paid a cut of economic activity. Because if they can't enforce it, believe me, the morality will evaporate. Right? The morality is a function of the threat of law, right? So in my opinion, they are going to come out with their own cryptocurrency. There is an argument to be made. And again, this kind of frustrates my first premise that government's not that bright. But there's an argument to be made that cryptocurrency, in particular Bitcoin, is a function of a deep state project thrown out there to crowdsource all the problems around a development of a cryptocurrency. And once it's all sorted out, you shoot them all in the head and you come out with your own, and you've just basically passed the cost of all this. Plus, you've developed all the social acceptance because everybody knows what this is now and will use it and adopt it. Mm-hmm. But again, I've not met that many people in government I thought were bright enough to think that all the way through. So I'm not sure I buy the argument. Nevertheless, the outcome could very well be the same. You got a free market solution. Let's assume it's a free market solution. And this invisible character is not just a government agent that set this all in motion. Assume it really was a free market solution. What do you think government's going to do, right? So people who believe in cryptocurrencies believe in the power of this new technology to frustrate government's ability to control. And I and my partner Jim Rickards take a dim view of that. We tend to think government's power is enormous, and when focused where it wants to, they pretty well get what they want. And so my assumption is you will see a consolidation of cryptocurrencies. You'll see governments kind of centralize around one or the other. They may tie it to SDRs or something else, and they'll turn this to their advantage. There will not be a great libertarian awakening, in my opinion, away from governments with cryptocurrencies.
All right. Okay. So as we draw towards the end of our conversation, I want to definitely tune in into what you're doing over at Mary Glean with your predictive analytics and how this kind of all ties into better understanding the markets and what you guys can do with your technology. So give us a rundown for those that may not be too familiar with it as to what it is and how they got started, how it became about, and give us some details into it and how more people can get involved and take advantage of with the good information you guys are providing through that service.
Okay, thanks. So the first thing to understand is that, in my opinion, and the opinion of my partners, everything the economics profession and governments that rely on these state PhD economists are wrong, in the sense that their models of reality are completely mistaken. And so here's the analogy I'd offer. In the mid 1500s, one of the major sciences of the day, a science that was a deep body of knowledge, it took years to apprenticeship through and come to journeyman and then professional status in the guilds. It was a deep body of knowledge, alchemy, and it was all wrong. Every one of their models were just wrong, but they didn't know it. And they had this deep bench of very intelligent people who wasted their lives monkeying around in the hunt for the philosopher's stone that would turn other objects into gold, right? And yet this was an enormous amount of human resources and intellectual horsepower. These people weren't dumb, right? They may not have had great dentistry and indoor toilets, but they weren't stupid, right? And they were spending an enormous amount of time and effort on this, and it was all wrong. And our premise, and how did that end, right? So in the mid 1500s, somebody invents a thermometer. I should probably learn his name to make the story a little better. He invents a thermometer, and for the first time, alchemists can begin to do real experiments. They can begin to measure what happens at what temperatures and record what catalysts react in what ways and do repeatable experiments. And all of a sudden, in less than 50 years, this fictitious, magical quasi-alchemy transforms itself because it had this accurate measuring device. It transforms itself into the foundations of scientific chemistry and modern metallurgy. How cool is that, right? In our opinion, everything about the modern financial world, all the economists, PhDs, the Nobel Prize winning economists, is exactly the same as alchemy. It's in exactly the same spot. It's really intelligent people spending an enormous amount of time and effort to chase magical formulas, magical incantations, mathematical models that are beautiful and elegant and have nothing to do with reality. And so we view ourselves as that thermometer. We view what we've done as create a tool that will allow financial practitioners, people who manage massive amounts of money, to actually see reality. So here's an example. If we were at the National Press Club, and I think we talked about this last time we talked, and somebody gets up in front of us and starts talking about how they're going to fix Yosemite, they're going to fix the park, they're going to make it better, right? They're going to dial up the number of badgers, dial back the number of bears, they're going to make it run more efficiently. We'd all just roll our eyes, right? We know that's just nonsense. You start making tweaks around the margins of a complex ecosystem, you're going to get a cascade of unintended consequences because it's a complex adaptive system. Well, yet, we listen to Janet Yellen and we listen to Bernanke and to Paulson and to Draghi and they talk about how they're going to dial up inflation and dial down unemployment. They're going to fix the world's economy. Really? Really? These people are insane. That is a hubris, drunk with power. They have no idea of the cascade of unintended consequences they cause every time they monkey around with interest rates, every time they monkey around with the price signals that make the entire free market system even function, right? And they're doing it not because they're necessarily ill-intended. I mean, they're doing it for the benefit of their cronies and their governments, but they're not doing it because they're trying to blow up the world. Quite the contrast, right? They think they're fixing things like alchemists, right? They're just busy chasing the philosopher's stone, and all of their models are wrong. It's why their track record for predicting what's coming is an almost perfect 0, right? If they were monkeys throwing darts at a dartboard, they'd be 50%, right? The reason they're so completely wrong is because their models are completely wrong, right? If I hold this pen up and I say, okay, write down what you think's about to happen, I'm gonna let it go, right? Everybody on the podcast goes, yeah, okay, it hit the desk, right? He's gonna have to get down, have his chair, and go get the damn thing. If you were the Fed and I let that go, everybody in the Fed went, right? Thinking it's gonna float because their models are just wrong. They don't understand how the world works. So what we've done is we've taken a blend of team science. We've taken science that in their respective fields is common as dirt. If you and I are intelligence analysts at the Pentagon, in the Department of Defense, after the towers come down, our boss comes in and says, talk to me, tell me something, right? What we can't say is, boss, we just don't have enough data. But, after another 4 or 5 attacks like this, we'll start to have enough data. We start doing some regressions and correlations and mean reversion. Nobody talks like that, right? Instead, what we'd say is, here's our best guess. Here's our best hypothesis of what just happened. And then we back up and we just map out all the indications and warnings that we would logically expect to see. If we're right, here's the indications we'd expect to see that confirmed. If we're wrong, here are the kind of warnings we'd expect to see that we're on the wrong path. And it's just Bayesian inference, 200-year-old math, common as dirt in the intelligence community. Now, add to that complexity science. Again, 60-year-old math. If you and I are working at Los Alamos on nuclear weapons modeling, or if we are at the National Geographic Weather Forecast Center and we're working on models for hurricane modeling, the complexity science is used every day, right? It's the right science for the right problem. And for whatever reason, these governments, these economists have just let all of this math and science, which is specifically relevant to them, pass them by. Studying an economy, studying geopolitical events is much more like studying a nuclear reactor or studying a weather cell than it is to study a machine, an engine, right? That can lend itself to tweaking and manipulation. That's the bottom line insight that we bring to this. Markets are complex, adaptive systems, just like an ecosystem, just like you'd expect they would be. And if you apply the same math, the right models to honor that reality, you get really good outcomes. So what it looks like we're doing is predicting the future, right? It looks magical. But I'd refer you to Arthur C. Clarke, the brilliant science fiction writer, who said any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So we're not doing magic. We're doing really good science. And so we're taking the very best human intelligence that have a track record of being able to see well into the future, 3 to 6 months. We're not trying to predict 30 years out, but 3 to 6 months, we posit the hypothesis, and we filter that through predictive analytics, through complexity science, through human intelligence, history, behavioral psychology, a number of elements we've added to this. Then we take those estimates, those hypotheses, we map out all the indications and warnings. I think, Mike, you saw the demo that we did with IBM that shows the kind of constellation.
Yeah, I saw that.
If you want, you can put that link in your show notes.
I will. All that information you sent me, I'm definitely going to include it below so people can see it for themselves directly.
Great. And so imagine that constellation of connecting ideas, right? They all impact your conceptual components. These are all the nodes and linkages. We weigh all of that. Now we give that over to artificial intelligence. The reason people have not been satisfied or happy with artificial intelligence to date is we typically ask it to do too much, right? It's machines. They're really fast, they're really accurate, but they're stupid, right? They can't think.
Right.
Humans are prone to error, ridiculously slow, but can be brilliant. It's the combination of the two that are so powerful. And so now you take this constellation of ideas that are put together by our human intelligence groups. Now you've got something to hand over to Watson. Now you're asking Watson, go read 9 million books, articles, transcripts a day, and let me know if any data impacts any of these conceptual components, connecting nodes or edges, and update that in real time. So now you've got something artificial intelligence can sink its teeth in, and it can do, and no human or group of humans can do, could possibly track all that, right? So it's that marriage of the two. It's the marriage of human intelligence and augmented intelligence with this complexity science wrapping it all together. And that is called, well, Merrill-Gleam's the company. That engine we call Raven for a number of reasons. That Raven powered, or Raven with Watson is its trade name. And that software as a service, that predictive analytics service, we're taking to the world's largest institutional investors. And so if you've got accredited investors, we're in the middle of a capital raise now. We've overcommitted. We've got a bunch of people who want to get into this, but if folks can move a little faster than they can, they're most welcome. They can go to fundable.com, put our name in, merrigleam.com, and go look at the offering, or they can go to our website at merrigleam.com. That offering link is right there in the middle. Click on the fundable link. Again, you have to be an accredited investor. And if you're not an accredited investor, but you like what we're doing, go to merrigleam.com and click on the RSS feed and kind of watch. We write all the time. Or go to Massengill Advisory, my page, same thing. I write all the time, and you can follow along there as well.
Now we have our very last question, then I'm gonna let you go. We have our touching on our point, so I want to respect your time. So caller, what's your name and what's your question? Where are you calling from and what's your question?
My name is Steven. I'm calling from New York. And my question is, your guest mentioned that precious metal owners should have their metal stored, I believe you said Singapore or Switzerland. Now, for people who have already purchased precious metals, how would you get that shipped to either one of those countries? And on top of that, you mentioned that these facilities would send your money to certain accounts that you may have, here in the States. But my question would be, how would could that negatively affect you having access to your money, being that the government wants a certain control over, the bank accounts or whatever? Does that make sense to you?
I think so. So like I said, I would keep a small amount of precious metals in the country, just enough to get you through an economic turbulence of 2 or 3 months, something like Puerto Rico suffering. I wouldn't keep all of it. There's a security risk, obviously, to try and control all that. As far as getting it overseas, your very best bet would be to just sell it here in the States and just move the cash. That would be the easiest by far. And because these systems, unless it's, that would absolutely be the easiest. The second thing, your question about repatriation of funds or whatnot, there's two advantages. One, I can't predict how the government's going to react. You could assume that they're probably going to slap some sort of a windfall profits tax on this, right? They're not going to give anybody a free ride. But as for how you repatriate your funds, you don't really need to. Goldmoney.com, for example, has connected to a Visa or debit card. You basically have access to your funds at any ATM machine in the world. So you and your family could boogie out and head to Acapulco, right? Go to any ATM machine, you got access to your funds. So that's of less concern to me. One of the great security features they have is that if anybody got your data, if they hijacked your account somehow and said, hey, sell the gold and send me the money, they will only ever send the money back to the same account that funded the account. So even if you lost control of your account, the worst thing could happen is you wake up and there's a buttload of cash in your account. You're like, where'd that come from? Right. So that's a pretty intelligent safeguard. So, but again, you can't plan for all contingencies, but just try to be smart. Best thing you could do, in my opinion, would be keep a little bit of precious metals in the house, just enough to buy some eggs and keep the family together, and then keep the bulk of your assets in these vaulting services. I like Switzerland and Singapore for a whole host of reasons. There are many others. And then I really wouldn't worry about the repatriation. It's simple as a phone call. And if you're not back at your local bank and you're somewhere else, you can just call them and work it out. There's ways to figure out how to do that. And you've got an ATM or a Visa card, you can just simply have access to your precious metals through any point of sale.
Fair enough. Well, caller, thank you for calling in, and appreciate you communicating with us. So, Kevin Massengill, it looks like we've been an hour, and so as I mentioned, I want to respect your time. So I thank you for joining us on RTD Live Talk. I think we've had a lot of great participation from people calling in, curious about how to diversify and to spread out their wealth over the planet a little bit. So I think you did a good job of helping those guys. Any last thoughts you want to leave us with here on RTD Live Talk?
No, terrific. I'm really pleased. It's always a pleasure to spend time with you, and thanks for doing this.
My pleasure. So once again, everybody, definitely, if you found this to be informative, I want to encourage you to share this video with your family and friends so they can find out a lot of the information that was shared today. And then also, if you're new to RTD, click the subscribe button, and look forward to bringing more RTD Live Talks in the future. And everybody enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for joining us on RTD Live Talk.
Thanks, Mike.